You know that you are alone, but at the same time you just don't feel it. In fact, what you feel is the presence of someone or something watching you as you walk from room to room in your own home. And even in bed, as you rest uneasy during the witching hours, strange shadows start moving across your bedroom walls, creeping ever closer to where you lay. This case is crazy and as equally as terrifying. Trust me on this one. You're not going to want to miss it. So guys, grab yourselves a hot drink, get comfortable and relax, because everything that I've just mentioned is nothing compared to this next case. This is the true and terrifying case of number 30 East Drive. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be in the world right now. Hello, I'm Lloyd, and welcome to this episode. Pontefract is a historic market town in the metropolitan borough of Wakefield and south of Castleford, and has a population of around 46,000 people. Pontefract is also home to the Pontefract Castle, the very place where King Richard II is thought to have died. Some believe he was murdered in his sleep, and other people, historians, believe that he was actually starved to death. Pontefract town is also the site of a series of known famous sieges during the English Civil War in the 17th century, with a huge history of blood-spilling violence, torture, betrayal, gruesome tales of death, suffering and tragedy. Is there any wonder Pontefract is without question one of the UK's most haunted towns? Which brings us up to more modern times. In the middle of September in 1954, Bill Farrer and his loving wife Barbara Farrer, they made the decision to move to their dream home in the historic marketing town of Pontefract. They were a close-knit family with a 2-year-old daughter named Jane, and given the fact that this new home had 3 bedrooms with a large front room, number 30 East Drive was believed to have been a perfect ideal home. However, in just less than 1 year, the Farrer family would soon move out of their beloved property, leaving most all of their clothing and other belongings behind. It was in just the first week the Farrer family became terrified of their own home. Objects would start levitating and moving on their own accord. Voices would be heard echoing in the hallways and empty rooms that weren't being used. Their new curtains would be found all ripped and shredded, still hanging on the rail, and their furnitures would often be moved into the centre of the rooms during the night. Bill and Barbara really feared for their 2-year-old daughter as well, because she would never settle. She wasn't able to settle. She would always be found crying with her face inexplicably bruised and scratched, covered in her own blood. Barbara actually started placing woolly mittens on the child's hands before bed. However, these aggressive injuries, these same injuries, would still continue to appear on the child's face, leaving both parents stunned and completely confused as to what to do next. That was until one evening Bill and Barbara heard a loud bang come from upstairs, and so they immediately rushed up the stairs, only to find their baby girl screaming and struggling to breathe with this large pillow placed firmly over her face. Fearing for the safety of their baby daughter, the Farrer family, they moved out the property that same night, and they never returned. The house was then stood empty for quite some time after that fearful evening. That was until the next unsuspecting family would move in. When Jean Pritchard moved into her new home at 30 East Drive, Pontefract in the August of 1966 with her husband Joe, her 15-year-old son Philip and her 12-year-old daughter Diane, she was so excited about moving into her new home to start a new life with her family. However, none of them had any idea of the terror and trauma that would lay in wait for them. Almost immediately during that first hot summer there, strange unnerving phenomenon would start to happen within inside the family home. It was a warm weekend when Jean Pritchard had finally finished getting the family home in some kind of homely and tidy order. She had brand new carpets laid down in each one of the rooms, and all of the household furniture finally moved in and placed in their rightful places. She arranged family framed photographs smartly placed on top of the fireplace and TV. A new large mirror was hung in the front room, and another on the wall in the downstairs hallway, just opposite the staircase. Happy family pictures hung up on the walls in each one of the rooms. A new sink with new taps was installed into the kitchen. And yeah, in no time at all, the Pritchard family had made this house their forever home. And so it was the perfect occasion to invite family and friends around to celebrate their new family beginning. And that's exactly what they did, and who can blame them? Once in and settled, Jean's mother, Sarah, she came around to stay for the weekend, and she was only too happy to babysit for both of her grandchildren, while Jean and Joe enjoyed an evening out together at the local working men's club just down the road. At around 9 p.m, little Diane, she was starting to feel quite tired, and after she had finished her warm cup of milk, she said goodnight to her grandmother Sarah and her big brother Philip, and then she took herself off to bed, leaving Philip and grandmother Sarah in the front room watching TV. Just 10 minutes or so later, something really unusual happened. In fact, Philip and grandmother Sarah, they would both be the first two members of the family to witness strange paranormal activity within the family home. They both saw what can only be described as a fine layer of chalk-like dust falling, not from the ceiling, but from a level below head height, with no simple explanation for this strange occurrence. The situation left both of them somewhat baffled and confused. In an effort to clean up the dusty mess before Jean and Joe arrived back home, grandmother Sarah walked into the kitchen to fetch some cleaning implements, when all of a sudden she slipped over and she really hurt her ankle badly in the process. Obviously, Philip heard the commotion, and he walked into the kitchen to find grandmother Sarah, who was now sitting on a chair at the table, rubbing her ankle. But what was eerily strange about the whole situation, grandmother Sarah had slipped on a pool of water that had mysteriously appeared from nowhere, and their efforts to mop up this water was thwarted by more pools of water appearing on the floor in front of their very eyes, with no cause of origin. And at this same time, young Diana was laying in bed, sleeping, when all of a sudden she was woken up quite abruptly to something or someone pulling her hair, and at the same time, something was throwing her teddy bears across her bedroom. Diane slowly sits up in bed and turns on the lights, and in doing so, she notices her bedroom ceiling light shade swinging violently, moving backwards and forth, without showing any signs of slowing or stopping. It was also at this point Diane noticed her porcelain dolls, individually one by one, jumping off the dressing table and landing in the middle of the floor in her bedroom near her bed, and yeah, she was terrified. Diane begins screaming at the top of her lungs in pure and total panic. And that's when her bigger brother Philip comes racing up the stairs, and he rushes into Diane's bedroom to find out what the hell all the commotion is about. And from that very first moment, he opened her bedroom door and he walked inside the room, just like that. All the lights and the electrics in the whole house simply turned off. Philip immediately grabs his sister by the hand and quickly but carefully leads her downstairs into the front room. Now, I know power cuts can and do happen, and they can be quite common within certain parts of the UK. The only difference in this situation was, how come all the other homes still had power and active lighting? How could a power cut just affect one house on the street? And is that even possible? I don't know. But these were the questions grandmother Sarah was asking Philip, who was now cuddling his terrified sister Diane on the sofa in the front room. The temperature inside the house began dropping rapidly, growing ever colder with each and every passing second. It felt like as if it was the middle of winter and somebody had left all the windows and doors open within the property. That's how cold it was. Then came this strange, creepy scratching sound, slowly and gently at first, then getting louder and louder, soon accompanied by knocking and bangs, seamlessly coming from the ceiling just above their heads. It was as if somebody was upstairs, kicking and banging the doors and walls, jumping jumping around. And pretty soon, these uncomfortable, strange and loud sounds started escalating and bleeding into the front room walls surrounding them, getting louder and louder and louder still. And just like that, all the lights in the house just turned back on, including the TV. And all this activity, this strange activity, just was gone as quiet and calm filled the house as if nothing had happened. So now Diane, Big Brother Philip, I'm not going to lie here, they were all pretty much freaked out, but no one more so than 12-year-old Diane. I mean, whatever that young girl experienced that night, it was violent and physically aggressive towards her and would change her as a child forever. Just a short while later, a slightly tipsy Jean and Joe arrived back home from their night out. And no sooner as they crossed the threshold and entered into the front room, almost immediately Grandmother Sarah, Philip and Diane started explaining their recent experiences of what just happened. However, their claims sounded utterly ridiculous, and their claims were ignored, were still disbelieved. After one busy, hectic weekend, Joe Pritchard took Grandmother Sarah back home, and then he dropped the kids off at school, while Jean walked to work, who had left food shopping duties for Joe, who did so just after dropping the children off at the school gates. He gets back home with the shopping bags, and he immediately starts to unload the shopping. He puts the bread in the bread bin, puts the milk in the fridge, and he puts the tinned food in the cupboards. And once he's finished putting the food away, he walks into the coal room and empties the coal sacks into the coal pit, when out of the blue the door seamlessly slams closed behind him. Thinking nothing more about it, he continues shaking the coal bags into the coal pit, when all of a sudden the light bulb starts to flicker and then turns off. A second later, the light bulb pops, leaving Joe in the dark. The light bulb unexpectedly explodes. Unable to see what he's doing, Joe returns to the door because obviously he wants out. But when he pushes down on the catch handle with his thumb to lift the latch, the door remains firmly shut as if it was stuck or locked. He then begins trying to body budge the door open, but still, the door doesn't budge. Surrounded in darkness, Joe becomes aware that the temperature in the coal room was now starting to drop quickly. Joe claims he continued trying to body budge the door open, and that's when he began hearing what seemed to sound like something or someone breathing rather heavily, moaning and muttering the words,
"Get out, leave,"
coming from the darkness right behind him. Joe frantically continues banging and body barging and even kicking the door, shouting and screaming, "Help me," in an effort to get out of there. And all the while, this cold and unknown entity continues stalking Joe from behind, moving ever closer towards him, making its presence known. And with what seemed like no other option available to Joe, he simply just crouched down in the corner of the coal cellar. He sat next to the door and he silently began to pray. An hour or so later, Jean returns home from work on her lunch break, and, hearing Joe's cries for help, Jean quickly opens the cellar door, only to find her husband Joe, who's completely and utterly traumatized. Yeah, okay, maybe the door was locked and that he had accidentally closed the door behind himself whilst being inside. Well, according to Joe's claims, when he stepped out of the dark coal cellar, he took a closer look at the door handle from both sides of the door. And that's when he quickly realised that the door didn't even have a latch lock fitted. And even more strange, the thumb latch was working just fine on both sides of the door, leaving Joe emotionally disorientated. And it would be just days later when Jean would experience for herself something unexplainable and as equally as terrifying. Jean was in the front room doing the ironing as normal when she noticed the shadows on the wall moving strangely in front of the stairs. Curious to see what's going on, Jean peers around the corner to, she's taking a closer look. And that's when she witnessed the landing light shade freely swinging back and forth at the top of the stairs. And as she's looking up at the stairs at the ceiling light shade seamlessly moving on its own accord, Jean claims she saw moving along the upstairs landing wall the shadow of what looked like a dark hooded figure heading towards her young daughter's bedroom. Alarmed by what she's just seen, Jean begins climbing the stairs to investigate when, all of a sudden out the blue, something or someone pushes over the grandfather clock that was positioned at the top of the landing, sending it crashing down the stairs. With such force, the grandfather clock smashes into pieces, exploding at the bottom of the staircase, with Jean just narrowly jumping out the way, avoiding serious injury. And all of this paranormal activity was just the start of things to come. Another time, Jean and Joe were up late watching evening TV in the front room, when all of a sudden a ghostly apparition appeared in the hallway, and then it slowly walked past the glass doors, only to seamlessly disappear in the dining room. The strange and dark entity seen by Jean and Joe both described the ghostly figure as wearing a hooded robe, believed to have been worn in the 16th or 17th century. This ghostly figure would be seen on multiple occasions by family members, who would eventually name this annoying family invader as Fred, and that was purely in an attempt to normalize and therefore making this uncomfortable situation less intimidating and less scary. And so when the family would hear knocks and bangs at night, they would simply respond by saying, "Shut up, Fred," or "Leave me alone, Fred, I'm trying to sleep," adding the normal into paranormal. And for a short while, a short term at least, this method of normalizing Fred would actually work in a strange and twisted way. It made living in the house much easier for the family, and also helped them accepting and coping with the unnatural situation. However, no one would see these ghostly apparitions more so than Diane. She would often be woken up in the middle of the night to heavy footsteps on the landing and loud knocks and bangs that would persistently be coming from inside her bedroom, and a ghostly vision of this tall dark hooded entity that would stand at the end of her bed watching her before stepping back into the shadows. One day Joe decided that he was going to find out what exactly is going on within his house, and so he heads downtown to the local library to do some history searching on the house, but he doesn't really find anything that really stands out, nothing out the normal at least. So he then changes tactic and he starts looking at the history of the town and the history of the lands. He begins reading through the history books of Pontefract more specifically, and, well, it didn't take him long to discover the grim truth. Firstly, Joe discovered that the house was actually built on top of a very large battleground, where many people were violently killed and slaughtered in battle. But that's not all he discovered, because not only was the house built upon top of a gruesome battleground, but Joe also uncovered that Pontefract town was the main settlement for the parish church. The parish church was connected to a monk dating right back to the 16th century who raped and murdered 7 young children. The monk was then captured by the church and then hung at the town gallows for his wicked and murderous crimes. Although he was hung in private in order to protect the parish church from shame and ridicule. However, according to historical archives, the location of the gallows back then was positioned almost exactly where Jean's house is standing to this very day. Chilled to his core and shocked by discovering this grim and evil information, Joe and Jean would soon come to realize that the tall, dark, ghostly, manifestual figure that's grooming their hallways and stalking their empty rooms within their own home has now got an identity. The identity is the notorious Black Monk of Pontefract. The family would endure a further 7 more years of paranormal, inexplicable events. Disgusting green and brown, dirty foam water would appear leaking from the taps and toilets. Constant strange pools of water appearing on the kitchen floor. The contents of the kitchen cupboard would be completely emptied out. The tinned food would appear neatly stacked on the kitchen side units. Food would be thrown into the middle of the kitchen floor, and the tea dispenser would be pulled by invisible hands. Strange voices echoing from the unused rooms at night. The lights in all the rooms of the house would just turn on and off. The house plants would somehow manage to leap out their pots and be found halfway up or down the stairs. Cupboard doors would shake violently with further knocks and bangs. Photographs of family members would be found ripped and shredded in half. Visitors and family members would also be slapped around their faces. Foul and unusual smells occurring in different parts of the house, lasting for weeks. There would be temperature changes and objects levitating and being thrown, including furniture, further dark shadowy apparitions. And it was during the last 3 years of the hauntings when the Pritchard family, they finally would reach out for help. Still not wanting to leave or give up their family home just yet, the Pritchards wrote a strong letter to their local MP asking for support and help in dealing with this dark entity that continues to plague the family home. Interested in the family's claims, the local MP would soon arrange to pay the Pritchard family a home visit. However, just 20 minutes after being inside the cold and eerie property, the MP was suddenly slapped around the face by invisible hands. He would also witness objects being moved without any obvious cause of means. Keys moving along the side unit, marbles seamlessly being repelled and then thrown from one side of the room to the other. Thanks to the support of the local MP, the local church minister would eventually get involved with the strange happenings taking place at number 30 East Drive, offering prayers and blessings and even performing 2 exorcisms within the property. Each room was blessed and all of the walls were flicked with holy water. Wooden crucifixes were hung up in each room of the house. It was also documented that during the time that the exorcism was conducted by the church, the house lost all electrical power and a pressure change and temperature change completely dipped as light winds came flowing throughout the house. However, after the service was complete, the insidious activity would eventually It disappeared, although it would only be 1 year later, in 1968, when the strange activity would return. But this time it was much more aggressive. All of the wallpaper in the different rooms would start to peel away from the wall, especially where the holy water was flicked. Deep scratch marks and destruction to furniture was most commonly found, along with more rips and tears to the curtains. And all the crucifixes were found snapped in half. These continuous loud knocks and bangs and dysfunctional disruptions would soon alert the attention of the police to the property. At first, when the police arrived, they believed that they were dealing with some kind of heated argument or some kind of domestic case. Not long after attending the property, one of the police officers was pushed down the stairs and then slapped around the face by invisible hands. And this incident sparked off a huge interest in the media. News reporters alike would take an interest in the property. In fact, one of the articles in the newspapers called the events harrowing and strange, and they actually named the poltergeist as Mr. Nobody. In 1969, during the later stages of the haunting, Diane was in the kitchen making some lunch when she saw this dark shadow appear next to her before slowly disappearing. Just moments later, Diane's long hair was suddenly pulled upwards in a most violent manner. In fact, some of her hair was actually pulled from her scalp, as she was then gripped around the neck and then dragged up the stairs, kicking and screaming by invisible hands. A truly terrifying event that left Diane with serious trauma. In fact, Diane was left with visible bruising and finger marks around her neck, and there was bruising to her body from where she was dragged up the stairs. This horrifying experience was witnessed by Jean and Philip, finally forcing the Pritchard family out the home once and for all. The Pritchard family moved out of that house the same day in the March of 1969. Obviously, it's extremely rare for poltergeist activity to become so aggressive and violent, causing physical harm. But in the case of the Black Monk of Pontefract, that indeed simply just wasn't the case. The house remains unlived in to this very day, ever since the Pritchard family moved out in 1969. Number 30 East Drive of Pontefract is known and believed to be the most violent poltergeist haunting in the whole of Europe, and on par with that of the Enfield hauntings from 1977. In 2013, a movie was released named When the Lights Went Out, and it was pretty much aimed at documenting the house hauntings as they unfolded. The movie captures all the screams and horrors that plagued the family for 7 long years, making this screen pick one to watch with company and with the lights on. I'll link the trailer below this video so you can check it out. Maybe you might want to give it a view. Maybe not. Number 30 East Drive of Pontefract stands today as a popular location for ghost hunters, clairvoyants and psychics alike. And even the TV show series Most Haunted did their live special there for Halloween, which is pretty cool. However, due to the violent and non-stop paranormal activity within the property, the house remains empty and untouched to this very day. Hello there, and thank you very much for watching this episode. And as always, if you have enjoyed this video, then please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Remember to hit the bell so you do not miss any of our new content. So what do you think to our UK's most violent poltergeist? Do you believe the Pritchard's family claims? Could you live at 30 East Drive, or maybe you just wouldn't mind visiting the property? Either way, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, until next time, stay safe. I'll see you on the next episode.